2014 has been another impressive year for the global Islamic finance industry, with growth coming from Islamic banks, but also in the Sukuk markets. I'm joined today by Khalid Howladar, the global head of Islamic finance for Moody's. Khalid, thank you for your time.
Thank you, James.
You recently published a report detailing the fact that 2014 has been a landmark year for the industry.
Sure.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, the really big shift that happened this year is that you saw non-Islamic sovereigns actually tapping the Sukuk market. So Islamic majority countries are natural issuers of this for obvious reasons. But when you see non-Islamic sovereigns like the UK, Luxembourg, South Africa and Hong Kong tapping that market, that marks a moment where it goes from being something that's a bit of a niche market to something that's far more global. And there are other drivers, beyond the retail populations that are driving the growth of the Sukuk market.
And can we expect to see corporates in those jurisdictions perhaps come to the market with follow-up issuances?
Well, one of the goals of those sort of non-Islamic issuances was to tap some of the increasing pools of Islamic liquidity that you do have within the Gulf and Asia. And the metrics suggest by doing an issuance in that Sukuk format, you do boost the demand for that paper. So that's an economic driver as to why Sukuk issuance may make sense. So corporates within those jurisdictions, if they've want to diversify their investor base to different jurisdictions, more in the Gulf and Asia, then that Sukuk format perhaps makes sense, both in terms of diversifying and tapping a different pool of liquidity.
And do you think the industry as a whole has become an attractive investment option, sort of irrespective of the religious component?
Well, I think it's important to note that, there's a religious origin, but ultimately there's a set of economics, fundamentals that underpin Islamic finance, a focus on ethical investment, sustainability, also asset backing, low leverage. So there's some principles there. And in terms of its attractiveness as a different sector, it's important to note most of the Sukuk to date are still credit instruments. They're still sort of bonds, fixed income equivalents. And so a lot of the drive to invest in these instruments is not so much the fact that they're Islamic, they're Sukuk. It's that investors want access to Middle Eastern credit or Malaysian credit. So it's still a more credit-driven investment opportunity rather than necessarily the religious aspect. It's an economic driver rather than a religious one.
Okay, and we were talking earlier about the fact that the industry as a whole is quite dislocated, quite fragmented amongst competing jurisdictions. How do you see the best way to approach this and to perhaps harmonize this in a more global context?
It's a bit of a tough one actually, because the industry is still at a very young, nascent stage, and countries sort of are favouring their own jurisdictions and their own regulation, and are quite reluctant to sort of cede sovereignty in that sense. So I think you need perhaps multilateral bodies, supranational bodies to sort of come in, and you're seeing sort of the IMF, IFC, World Bank sort of take an interest in this space, and perhaps with their objectivity and sort of distance from that, they can bring some guidance, give technical assistance on regulations that would improve transparency, liquidity, etc., and bring these different parties around the table, and ideally sort of get them sort of speaking the same language and share the goal, which is overall a bigger, deeper, broader, more liquid market that would benefit all parties.
Okay, sure. Now, Khalid, you mentioned obviously that 2014 was a landmark year, particularly for the Sukuk market. We saw non-Islamic sovereigns coming to issue in the markets. For 2015, can we expect to see the same level of perhaps innovation and depth as we did this year?
I don't know so much about innovation. At the moment, the industry still needs to focus a bit on the basics. And so one of the issues in the Sukuk market is that the structures used in these instruments are still quite diverse, and you need sort of a harmonization between the structures. And so I think the industry needs to focus on getting standards in place, the more simple elements to improve liquidity and transparency. So 2015, I think you will see more issuance. That globalization that I spoke about, global investors are becoming comfortable with the product, comfortable with the complexity, and they're starting to participate in that, and that will globalize it. And that will become a virtuous circle in the sense that there'll be more investors to tap, then hence there'll be more issuance, and so I think that trend will continue. And I think you'll see more sort of non-Islamic corporate sovereigns, tapping that market going forward.
Okay, great. Khalid, thank you for your time.
Cheers. Thank you very much.